Today's topic is why Rainbow Six Siege is unpopular. Not just talking about the cheater thing, but the general malaise of the current situation as it stands. So dudes, I'm G, and I yap about Rainbow Six Siege. For how much longer? I'm not really sure. It depends on what happens next season, season after that, and year 10. Bro, your chair creaky as hell.
Bro, yeah, no shit.
First off, and I'm gonna hammer this home again and again and again, and I don't care how many times, I don't care how many videos I'm gonna make talking about it, because if I'm gonna talk about the game on a somewhat daily basis, I know that my promise to do these videos every day has not been lived up to, but if I'm going to cover it as frequently as, say, a daily podcast for any kind of commentary that you see fit, then I'm gonna talk about it. Because it's relevant. It's not going to suddenly stop being relevant. It's an issue that is pervasive. It is affecting the game's longevity, and it will affect the player retention for many, many months to come. Cheating is a multifaceted problem, and the reason for this comes down to two things. One is that the game is very complex, and the other factor is that people want to compete and get a higher rank because they think that's fun. Now, in an environment where you have cheaters in just about all your games, regardless of whether you know they're there or not, whether they are closeting and hiding it well, or they're attempting to closet and they're terrible at hiding it, the fact remains that the very presence of the climate being the way it is creates a sense of unease and a sense of lack of trust in the competitive process in which you are playing the game. So therefore, the value at which you rank up isn't nearly as impactful and nearly as satisfying as it used to be. And it also makes it a lot more difficult to try to learn the game, because when you get fried, half the time you're not going to know when it's a cheater versus something else. Something to this extent is what I encountered when I was getting back into Valorant not too recently. With Valorant, that game has a laundry list of complaints about its matchmaking, particularly with Smurfs. A lot of people are very, very unhappy with how easy it is to get Smurf accounts in that game, mainly because Valorant, unlike Rainbow Six Siege, separates players by their skill bracket if you want to play ranked. So you can't play ranked with your friends if your skill disparity is too high, if the gap is too large. So people will Smurf and they will derank or play badly on purpose in order to play with their lower ranked friends. Or sometimes you'll have boosters, people carrying their friends or carrying people who are paying for the boost. I don't know why you would pay for a boost so that you could get to a rank that you're not going to be comfortable at and then get your butt kicked anyway. But, you know, we're just, gamer kids are an interesting breed. But at least with Valorant, your greatest opponent in that game, as unfair as it is somebody who is playing the game with the same constraints that you are playing. At a certain point, it can be a pain in the ass to grind and improve to the point where you can fight effectively against the Smurf in your lobby, but at least you can outplay the Smurf. You can't outplay somebody with walls. You can't outplay somebody who's spin botting. So cheating undermines the integrity of the competitive matches, and it makes ranked pretty much a useless venture to play. There's basically no point in playing unless you want to put up with that. Once you start hitting around Emerald, which is even lower of a bracket than I heard originally, for the longest time, this issue managed to sweep under the rug because, oh, well, you know, cheating is only really a thing in Champ Elo or Diamond Elo, and my games are fine. Well, congratulations, the problem is spreading, and it's getting into that end of the bell curve. We're not just seeing it in the second to third deviations of the bell curve. We might even start seeing it in the first deviation or towards the center around gold and silver. Ubisoft's efforts to combat cheating have fallen short because, in my opinion, the code base is too old to be sustaining a game with this level of popularity and with this much of a focus on competitive play. So the only solution that Ubisoft has, and people don't like hearing this argument because they'll say, well, you're not a game dev. You don't know what you're talking about. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. But the only solution, because nobody else has given me one every time I bring it up and say, what should we do? The only solution that I can personally think of, despite not knowing much about game development, I know enough about admin to understand that there's certain things that need to be done here that aren't being done. My estimation as somebody who's been playing games for a long time is that the game needs to be ported to a different code base. It needs to be ported to a different engine. Essentially, in practice, and perhaps maybe in name, a Rainbow Six Siege 2. Now, a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is not going to fix every problem with the game, and a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is not going to eliminate every cheater. It could eliminate 90% of cheaters, 80%. 70%. In my opinion, anything above a 50% reduction in cheaters is worth striving for, because the game is so inundated with these losers that even just a 50%, if you cut it in half, a 50% drop would have a hugely impactful effect on the play space. And I think more people will be interested in playing ranked. And if more people are interested in playing ranked, then the second problem I'm going to cite won't be as much of an issue. Rainbow Six Siege has a steep learning curve. It has complex mechanics. Every ability is unique to each operator. Each map has a laundry list of common angles, hiding spots. Opening a wall on one map may not be the same as opening a wall on another map. Opening the quad wall on Coastline is not the same thing as opening the default wall on Oregon top floor, or the default wall for Clubhouse CCTV. Rainbow Six Siege doesn't just require an extensive framework of competitive shooter knowledge, like what is playing for refrag, how to hold a 2v1 crossfire, when to peek versus when not to peek. Little tactical things like that are very, very important for success in this kind of game. But on top of that, you have to learn the Siege specifics. So all of this combined creates an environment that can be quite intimidating and discouraging for newcomers, with a ton of information overload that a lot of people choose to ignore if they decide to keep playing the game, which further exacerbates the problem, because competitive games like this are not particularly well known for their accommodating communities. So then these players will probably get yelled at by somebody, which encourages them to get more defensive and then probably argue with other people that they run into. And this is something that the game has always suffered from community-wise since I was covering the game in 2017 on YouTube. Not to mention, Rainbow Six Siege's steep learning curve is a tough sell to people who are even interested in the esportsy, really sweaty kinds of comp shooters like Siege. Most people have pretty much gravitated towards Counter-Strike for this kind of gameplay. Rainbow Six Siege is a direct competitor to Counter-Strike. It has 5v5 elimination, plant the bomb to win style gameplay as part of its competitive main mode. If you want to play the pinnacle of that particular kind of mode, if you are really, really invested and interested in the specifics of this particular kind of game the same way you'd be interested in a sport, you're probably not going to play Rainbow Six Siege. And this isn't a way to knock on Rainbow Six Siege and say that it's bad. I'm just talking about market dynamics and why people would pick Siege over another game. Siege's complexity also, compared to other, kind of bro shooters for guys on the couch like Warzone, that makes it difficult to appeal to that demographic. And I think that demographic has more or less walked away from the game after many years, that there were going to be more and more things injected into the play space, making the game progressively more complicated. As a result of its live service content model, Rainbow Six Siege has been able to sustain itself out of a bad launch, but it also has a double-edged effect of making the game infinitely more complicated over a long period of time. So Rainbow Six Siege has a difficult time injecting new players. It has a dedicated, strong, supportive niche community that's been around with it for a long time, but aside from the pandemic swing that we had with everybody staying inside and watching streams all the time, Jinxie's ability to talk to the most common demographic of Siege player, which is the high schooler with an Xbox, doesn't really have as much to do with the more sweaty esports-focused components of the game. The esports component is certainly really important for Siege from a marketing point of view, but the bottom line is people enjoy the game, especially on console, because it offers a particular kind of precise gunplay that is not offered by other FPS games on the market right now. The average bro shooter that is popular on Twitch, like Warzone or Apex, has a ton of aim assist, and such games are also lambasted in those communities as unserious or normie games. Siege is popular enough to have its little base, which is not irrelevant, but at the same time, it's struggling to get market penetration, and it has pretty much since 2018. One of the reasons that I think the game is suffering from the ability to penetrate the market is a lack of modularity. There is a significant amount of restriction in terms of customizing operators, weapons, and gameplay settings for custom games. The community would like greater control over their in-game experience, as evidenced by some unique sorts of things that content creators have done in their own personal custom games like hide and seek, stuff like that. Siege, once in a while, does pretty popular little arcade modes like Showdown, Grand Larceny. This is evidence of a framework that can be adapted to a number of different things, and Rainbow Six Siege is the perfect game to have that kind of modular experience with, mainly because the maps themselves are fully destructible in many different ways. Much of what makes Rainbow Six work is the sheer amount of variety in terms of how you deconstruct a map, or set up a map, or how you attack that particular setup, or hold that setup. I personally think that if Rainbow Six Siege had more options for its custom games, it would offer some unique opportunities for content creators to interact with their community, which is always great for engagement, but it's also going to allow the average person to have an avenue away from the sweaty sort of gameplay that they may not enjoy with ranked, or even to a certain extent standard if it's still not for them. But Rainbow Six Siege has very much focused on its competitive aspects. Now, despite what people say, where they consistently whine and complain that the game is only balanced for Pro League, it's not. The game does, in that sense, often suffer from what seems to be unclear design direction. Changes can frequently end up causing confusion about what specific approach the developers want to do. A good example of this was when Mozzie lost the shotgun many years ago. Now, as far as I can tell, I do not believe that that particular team that was responsible for that decision is still involved in the game as it stands right now, but those changes do have ripple effects that people still talk about many years after the fact, even if the new balancing team comes in and they may not necessarily have been responsible for that. Changes like Mozzie losing his shotgun can end up seeming like good ideas at the time, but then many years later, when the Mutant Mozzie meta isn't nearly as popular or powerful as it used to be, well, suddenly it makes us wonder why the hell he even lost a shotgun in the first place. For a couple of years, Ubisoft adopted a practice of just whack-a-mole nerfing any problematic weapon or any problematic fragging operator, to the point where operators like Alibi would get a scope buff, then the scope would get taken away, then the recoil would get adjusted, then something else, then this, then that, when all we really needed to do was get rid of the scope to begin with. And eventually, that's exactly what Ubisoft did. But sometimes it feels like certain balance updates may be made for a number of different player populations, and that generates confusion among the player base as to where exactly the developers want to go with the game. Do they want it to be a super sweaty esports fest, or do they want the overall experience down to quick match to be experienced by everybody? Do they want the game to be gunfight heavy, or do they want the game to be strategically minded with a lot more emphasis on utility? That kind of gets into the realm of League of Legends with guns. And I don't think that most people would like League of Legends with guns. Ubisoft is in the difficult position of having to please a ton of different people at the same time, having to make the esports guys happy, making the casual players happy, everything that you can think of in terms of the breadth and scope and spectrum of the Siege player base. Everybody has to be happy in some way, shape, or form, but not everybody is going to be happy with every single decision. When a popular fragging option like Twitch's F2 gets put on the chopping block once, sometimes it can get frustrating because players aren't sure whether or not it's going to get put on the chopping block again. At a certain point, the F2 had a recoil adjustment, then it had the foregrip taken away, to the point where most people just don't even touch it at all. Even in Siege's esports scene, most people just run the 417 for its quick 2-tap kill. Some people who have really, really good recoil control are still making the F2 work, but it ended up making it so that the average person suddenly just wasn't really able to use this weapon anymore. And changes like this are a part of the reason why Ubisoft, however unfairly, has a reputation of being sycophantic to the Pro League and getting on their knees and kissing their ass all the time. Because whether or not Pro League players come out and say, we don't like this, we don't know why Ubisoft did this, it doesn't matter. Because the average gamer doesn't look at it in terms of skilled and not skilled. They see it in terms of average people who enjoy games and no life sweats. It's not a charitable way to look at it. It's not the accurate way of looking at it. But regardless, market dynamics are not about what's right. They're about what people want to buy. Another factor that I think has contributed to Siege's unpopularity is the slowing down of new content. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a good reason to slow down the pace of new operators, maps, and features being added to the game. However, I do think that at a certain point, the Ubisoft developers ended up accidentally, or maybe they were aware of this when they were doing it, they ended up Pavloving their audience into thinking that they could sustain that kind of content model way back in 2017, 2018. In order to get this game up to a point where they could actually start making money off of it and recoup what I believe was probably a loss when the game first came out in 2015, Ubisoft would release 2 new operators with new guns, new gadgets, obviously, and a new map to go along with it. So each operation sort of had this theme that encompassed the tactical energy and vibe that I guess the new operators kind of brought to the table. They were geographically specific. There was art, there was unique music, there was this whole kind of energy centered around the multiplayer space, sort of being an actual operation that was taking place like something out of a Tom Clancy book. For whatever reason, we ended up losing that when we stopped adding new maps each season, which, again, I understand why we can't keep adding new maps, but I remember really feeling like I got let down when we got to Operation Shifting Tides, and the entire energy of it is this big, you know, it's an oil rig map, the music is cool, we're adding PMC operators to the game for the first time, which was a really controversial decision. It was really exciting. When you booted up the game for the first time, it really felt like there was a paradigm shift in terms of where Rainbow Six Siege was going. And then we got a theme park rework. Theme park was already a hugely unpopular map, and regardless of whether the theme park rework was received well or not, it was really difficult to sell that as something to be excited about because of the negative associations having to do with moving away from new map content altogether to making a rework into a dedicated part of the content update. Sometimes it makes me think of an alternate universe or an alternate timeline where Rainbow Six Siege follows more of a Deep Rock Galactic kind of approach, where it would have leaned into the co-op mechanics, and that it basically could have been a live service co-op game. Maybe instead of having to worry about adding new content every 3 months, they could have slowed down the pace, but then every 6 months, using Shifting Tides as an example, here's Operation Shifting Tides, you and the Night Haven blah 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 gotta stop the big bad on an oil rig, good luck. At the time, they would get to something like Operation Shadow Legacy when they added Sam Fisher as a playable character. You could have done something where Sam Fisher is ahead of the pack and scouting stuff out with a bunch of big bads in a big building somewhere, and then Rainbow Six is assisting him. That, in turn, would have been an interesting way to play around with the Tom Clancy license and have some fun with the creative writing, the creative aspects of it, while still providing an experience that people could get behind. Instead, ever since the game launched in 2015, it's just solely focused on its multiplayer component, which, as it stands currently in 2024, almost 10 years down the line, we're starting to encounter serious infrastructure problems with focusing on a multiplayer live service game without giving it the proper support that it needs to sustain a player base when there's so many other options in the market that anybody else can download for free and play. You can play the finals right now if you want the destructive environments. You can play Valorant if you really want that competitive environment with a cheater-free sort of playscape. If you want a police tactical shooter, you can play Ready or Not. If you don't want the police tactical shooter, but you want something a little bit more Battlefield-esque, then you can play Hell Let Loose. The gaming market is not the same as it was back in 2015 or even 2020. Chasing whatever is the biggest shooter trend at the time is not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea for your game's problems. A battle royale isn't going to fix the problems going on with Halo. Rainbow Six Siege 2 isn't going to save Rainbow Six Siege in and of itself, as evident by what happened with Overwatch to Overwatch 2. Rainbow Six Siege needs to have a top-down sort of deconstruction and reconstruction of the core engineering of what is making the game function as a multiplayer experience. And if that doesn't happen, then I'm not sure how much longer the game is going to last, but they keep talking about getting us to 100 operators. And so, like I've done last year, and I'm going to do again this year, I'm just going to pinch my nose, hold my breath. A lot of people in my audience are furious with me over doing this, but I'm just going to be very blunt and upfront with everybody in my audience. When I talk about why Rainbow Six Siege is unpopular, I'm going to try to answer that question as honestly as I can. And I know that the guys at Ubisoft can take it, because that's their job. And I've talked to and I've met plenty of people at Ubisoft that understand I'm not coming at it from a place of malice. If I wanted this game to die, I would have stopped playing it a long time ago. I want it to succeed. I think it is the most interesting, intricate, and rewarding competitive shooter experience ever made. But I'm also not a fool. All the good marketing in the world, and Ubisoft has great marketing, but all the good marketing in the world is not going to be enough to help this game. If the cheater thing is not figured out, I'm not saying Ubisoft has to apologize for anything. I'm not saying that they have to get on their knees and beg for forgiveness, but I do think that there's an element of trust there that has been eroded, and we need to know who's talking to us when they say they want 100 operators in this game. Is it the devs who are passionate and want the game to succeed, or is it corporate? Sometimes it's difficult to tell who's telling us that. I am not a gamer populist. I'm not a member of the rage mob that's always whining and complaining about how awful the industry is. But Operation New Blood is probably, until we get a massive overhaul, gonna be the last quote-unquote maintenance patch this game will ever be able to get. If the next season turns out to just be a huge nothing burger, and the season after that is a nothing burger, I am very, very worried about the future of the game and whether or not Ubisoft is going to want to even allocate resources to it if they realize that they're not getting anything out of their investment anymore. So that's why I think Rainbow Six Siege is unpopular right now. And I hope that it gets popular again, because I could use the money. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Deuces.